Hello and welcome to Online TV. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann. I'm a senior consultant in the risk security and privacy practice at Online Business Systems. Online is a digital transformation and cybersecurity consultancy. Since 1986, we have been using technology to deliver dramatic business results for companies throughout North America. I am joined today by my colleague in the risk security and privacy practice, Mr. Greg High. Greg, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here, Jeff.
Greg is a principal consultant within our practice, so he outranks me, so I will defer to whatever he says. We're talking about scoping for PCI, and there's a question that I wanted to ask that I think the answer is hopefully informative and educational for our listening audience, for our customers, but a burning question that I've had and I've heard from many people over the years is, why is network segmentation, which is sort of the primary way that you create this scoping reduction, this sense, it's the primary activity of scoping, I think. Why is it not a requirement in the PCI data security standard? Why is it only, to use their words, strongly recommended?
Overall, I think that the PCI Council had the foresight and the wisdom to understand that the technology was going to be evolving. And if they ever put a stake in the ground and said, you need to do it this way, then companies would all pivot to trying to attempt that when it may or may not fit their architecture, their business model, any of their use cases. So by not being prescriptive, the PCI Council affords organizations the opportunity to put together programs that can support multiple layers of scoping and segmentation, whether it's application layer or access or network layer.
Yeah, that's. I agree with you, and to extend on that, I think it's also just simply a fact that every company is different, and although networking in general is sort of done the same, and obviously there's a migration to different ways of doing it in the cloud these days. So there's that interim period, which is almost antiquated at this point with the whole idea of virtualization. But every company does it differently, so it'd be very difficult to come up with one prescribed way of doing it for everybody. I remember in the early days of PCI, before there was this concept of scoping, it was assumed that the PCI standard was simply a measurement of how you were doing your security program within your organization as it pertained to a specific type of data, sensitive data, in this case, credit card data, or what we call cardholder data. But when I first started doing PCI, it was, let me look at everything. Let me look at your whole company and your whole enterprise network. And for the most part, that was the card data environment back in those days, because there wasn't anything being done in terms of isolation or network segmentation. But I remember the days of version 2 of the PCI standard, which I think that came out in 2010. And even though it wasn't a requirement, the idea that companies had to discover and determine all the places within their network where there was cardholder data present and try to move it around and effectively isolate it into what came to be known as the cardholder data environment. You had to go through that exercise whether you were claiming that the cardholder data environment was a subset of your overall network or not, which was kind of interesting sometimes. But the far and away, and I'm not convinced whether it was an intended or unintended benefit of that exercise that all the companies had to go through, was all the cardholder data storage places and all the people that were using it that did or didn't need to use it. And if you remember, in the early days, card data was everywhere. It certainly did clean things up. And if there's a progression here, it did enable companies to start thinking about whatever their topology was, coming up with this idea of a cardholder data environment that would be isolated or segmented off from the rest of their network.
And it keeps the assessment from having to adjudge the entire security program of an organization that may or may not have specific relevance to PCI card data, may have relevance to other confidential types of data, but within the PCI framework, I often found myself looking at policies and procedures that really did not apply specifically to the DSS. And as you said, the DSS evolved in version 2 to start to find that data, to start to exercise a little more discipline and control around that particular data type,
Right.
which data classification is another entire conversation, but a lot of data classification really started happening at that point and getting an understanding of those data types.
All right, great. Thanks, Greg. That'll wrap us for today.
Thanks, Jeff.